There was a time, a couple of memories ago, where we woke up in the morning, looked at ourselves in the mirror, and started to come up with excuses to avoid school, but to no avail. We packed our bags, worshipped our parents, and went to school to pursue our education for a better future. Exhausted and tired, we go to sleep thinking about the day we spent, only to repeat the same routine over again. But one thing we didn't know was that our lives were about to change. An unknown disease made its presence known on a faraway land, but we didn't give it importance because we thought we were far away from danger. But it soon became a common topic when the number of patients started to mount up. Actions had to be taken. Schools were shut in a state of emergency, and that's when we started to regret about not going to school on the days we could. People were worried about this invisible threat among them, and scientists finally addressed this threat as COVID-19, a virus that started a global pandemic that brought the entire world to a halt. During these times, the people who were forced to stay inside their homes because of the strict social guidelines imposed by their governments had to watch quietly while this silent killer slowly made its move. As the death toll increased day by day, so did the anxiety level of the people. One question arose in the minds of the people every day: whether they would be the next victim of this death in disguise. It is almost an impossible task to keep your mental health stable while there's a crisis outside the four walls of your house. Many have lost their loved ones, and that has driven some of them to the verge of depression, having suicidal thoughts, and committing other heinous crimes. In the past few months, Sri Lanka has seen an increase in the number of cases of domestic violence and murder. One of the major root causes for all this chaos was mental instability. Now that we have identified the root cause, the question remains as to why we haven't encouraged this topic to be brought to the attention of our people. Our mental health gets affected according to the various circumstances we face in our life. So right now, in the midst of this global pandemic, we are more vulnerable than ever, and because of that, there's a high risk of the instability in our mental health increasing. Therefore, joining us today on our program, Hear the Unspoken, to educate us regarding the mental health risks involved in these troubled times and to provide us with some guidance to get us through this period is Mr. Naren Selvaratnam, the Director of Deep Haven Counseling. He is an esteemed academic in the field of psychology and also a practicing educational psychologist, psychotherapist, and a scientific researcher in the field of mental health in Sri Lanka. And over the years, he has contributed to the field of psychology in Sri Lanka by producing many researches and publishing his own book, which covers many aspects of his research and his perspective on human cognition.
Hello everyone, my name is Naren Selvaratnam and I am from Deep Haven Counseling. So before we start this particular program, I would like to take this time to thank the media unit of Royal College for organizing this and also for considering me. So before we start, one of the first things that I want to discuss here is about some of the biggest misconceptions of the society on mental health. See, now one of the first things that I need to say here is that people don't realize how important it is. Majority of the people believe that talking about one's own thought process is a weakness. Obviously not everyone, but most of the individuals. But what I want to tell you today is that if someone wants to speak about their own thought processes, it's not a weakness, but it's a very courageous step. And it also indicates that you are on the right path towards healing yourself. One of the main reasons for people to have some sort of reluctance is because of lack of emphasis on mental health in our education system. So, therefore, it is something that needs to be addressed in our education system. But in some sense, I think organizing a program like this is, of course, beneficial because you are helping a larger group to understand the importance of mental health. So that is, of course, a very good thing. And having talked about that, one could always ask, is there any specific stage in our life where mental health issues start to build up, or does it just happen along the way we get matured? Well, let me tell you something. There isn't a specific age per se when it comes to the development of certain patterns of thinking or where mental health issues start to kind of come out. But as per the cognitive theory, most of the times these kind of psychological problems are results of maladaptive thinking or because of our dysfunctional beliefs that we have about ourselves. So maladaptive thinking is a result of the beliefs that we have about ourselves. So we usually call these ones core beliefs, and they are formed due to an accumulation of our own personal experiences. So what I have to tell here is that more than the experience itself, what greatly matters is how exactly we are going to react towards it. Because our reaction or our interpretation is exactly what makes us, continue to believe in ourselves in certain ways. It kind of changes how we see ourselves, how we are going to perceive ourselves, like our reaction or our interpretation towards certain experiences. So there isn't a specific age, but childhood definitely draws a lot of attention, as this is a crucial time that shapes one's understanding about pretty much everything. So if someone says that you can't do things and you are not good at this and all that, it kind of changes the way that you see yourself. It changes the way you believe in yourself, and that is going to kind of continue in your later life as well, because this particular belief is exactly going to generate a lot of other thought process that you have in your normal time periods. So this is one of those ways that people tend to have psychological issues. So it's very important that we understand our experiences and we face them appropriately, and then we interpret them correctly in a positive way that could actually empower us. So with that being discussed, now one could always again ask, how do we identify a person with mental health issues, and what kind of symptoms do we have to watch out for? Well, there are lots of symptoms, and symptoms could vary from one person to another. But what you need to find is the degree to which these things affect a person's day-to-day activities. If someone has gone through drastic changes, maybe you can just talk to that person and ask how they are doing, like in a very respectful way. Because you can't necessarily say like these are the main symptoms. For instance, if someone is depressed, they might stay away from some of the things that they used to enjoy. They might have changes in their appetite. They might have a low mood. Some people have a normal mood, but they might have some other changes as well. So we have to be very observant, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we are willing to listen. Listening is more important, and then making sure that you come with some sort of like helping hands is exactly what is required in that kind of a situation. So as I said earlier, there are multiple symptoms, but it's always important to be observant. And let's talk about another question just like this. So some addictions, now there are lots of addictions these days, and oftentimes we even hear about these things on news as well. So what exactly can cause these kind of addictions, and how exactly this could harm our mental health? So more than the causation, let's talk about how exactly this could harm our mental health. So let me tell you that almost anything can become an addiction. For instance, games, drugs, spending money. So these are all addictions if you do it excessively. If you are doing this normally, then that's fine. But then if it has taken more prominence in every day, then it of course is an addiction. So any addiction is not good in my personal opinion, because that shows lack of control. So for us to gain control, one has to always have a plan. So simply letting an addiction control one's behavior is definitely a road for much bigger problems. So for instance, one may skip school just to play a few more hours of a game. So having self-control is a very important thing. If someone is a teacher could always be able to see this in kids, in students. And if you are a student who has a bit of an understanding about how things work, maybe it is important that you see how much of hours you spend in a given day playing your games, or maybe doing something that you think is very addictive. Because the more you give prominence to this particular addiction, the more it starts to control you. So we don't need that kind of external things to have control in our lives. So it's very important we take the control back. And very similarly, I think part of the reason why addictions have become this much of a common topic these days is because of online education, because students no longer enjoy the same interactions they used to enjoy in the school time. So even the first 6 hours of any given day is spent inside their own homes, and this is mainly done with the assistance of digital devices. So since students spend 6 hours with their digital devices, they tend to spend rest of the times also with the same device. Too much of screen time, of course, is not good, and it has other medical related problems as well, not just psychological problems. But the thing is, these days it is very difficult to stay out of our screens as well, because we can't avoid them. But what I want you to think is, what exactly do we do during the rest of the times now? If you get a day, a particular given day, we don't need to spend the entire day using our digital devices. So if we finish our classes, what are we going to do in between? So we need to have better ways of spending our free time. So communication is the first step. You have to communicate with your family, try to connect with people. And this is not just for students but for parents as well, because if we get a family, if parents are also on their devices just like kids, then everyone would be on their devices. So there needs to be dedicated times where everyone stay out of their devices and try to actually connect with each other, having face to face conversations and all that. And even maybe with your friend, it's not just always WhatsApp messages and texting and all that. Maybe sometimes you can actually talk to your friend over the phone. So maybe that will help a little bit. And these days, of course, because of the COVID and because of the lockdowns, it's very difficult to go and talk to people face to face, which I understand. But during the rest of the times, when we have our free time, we can always think what exactly we could do. Maybe spend some time gardening with the family members and also something like that. And with that being discussed, another question that I want to address today is that people are worried because of the pandemic, and that's normal. But on top of that, when you switch on the news, you are going to frequently hear the word COVID-19, and whether that has something like a particular effect on us physically or psychologically. It could make people stressed. Yes, people who get exposed to negative news all the time may start to worry, which is a very powerful form of imagery, and it could result in people feeling negative bodily sensations, for example, increased heart rate or breathing problems, stomach ache, and maybe feeling that you have a cold. And there's a lot more as well. We call these psychosomatic symptoms. What we usually think becomes reality in some sense. So it is important what exactly we listen to. Listening to too much of negative things, once again, pretty much what I explained earlier, it kind of is an experience which helps in how to kind of interpret the things that are happening around you. So if a lot of people say that this is a problem and this need to be amended and all that, it ultimately would become a problem, and our mind would start to react similarly. So people are worried because of the pandemic, and that's normal. But on top of that, when we switch on news, we are going to always hear about the word COVID. So does that have something to do with how we feel physically and psychologically? I think it has got a lot to do with how we feel psychologically, because getting exposed to negative news all the time, it automatically will start to make people worried, which is of course a very powerful form of imagery. And as I said earlier, our experiences kind of forms what we believe and how we think. So if we start to see a lot of negative information all the time, it kind of shapes the way that we see ourselves and also the surrounding. So if we sense that we are being threatened, we don't have enough security, that of course is going to have a lot of repercussions, and what could be one of the reasons why people start to actually feel stressed and all that as well. So there is a great degree of uncertainty these days, and this uncertainty coupled with negative news and spending too much of time on the screens, lack of human interaction, and all these things are going to have negative consequences on a person or negative reactions on a person. And when a person suffers mentally, it of course is going to have a certain amount of physiological sensations as well, like increased heart rate, breathing difficulties, body aches, stomach aches, and maybe feeling cold and all kind of sensations. So it is very important we have a mechanism to talk about these kind of things, a platform to talk about these kind of things. So we call these kind of sensations psychosomatic symptoms. So in some sense, what we think becomes reality. And this is exactly why I am usually encouraging everyone to stay away from too much of negative information, because we know COVID is a bigger problem. It's a contagious virus. We know about that. So if we know that, the best thing we could do right now is to be proactive, like take the required precautions. But listening to maybe news every day about the particular number of cases and all that, of course, might not help in the long run. It's going to create too much of other problems as well, and one could mentally suffer, of course. So another thing that I want to discuss is how exactly this pretty much has influenced, COVID has influenced the mental health of people. What I have seen is there's two groups of people. The first is actually the ones who have become resilient because they have developed alternative ways to cope up and also to stay positive and deal with uncertainty. But there's again another group of people who find it very difficult to deal with uncertainty, and they are kind of the people who would need actually someone to talk to. And the restrictions and all these kind of lockdowns and all that limits the chances that people have to have a real talk, like interaction and all that, which pretty much is a hindrance. So it is very important these days that we have the understanding that this is not going to continue, and we are of course trying our best to get back to normalcy. So it is very important we have some sort of hope. And if you know someone who doesn't have that kind of hope, installing hope is one of the first things that you would have to do, because people need assurance. Lack of assurance, especially in times of uncertainty, is a recipe to feel really bad. So if you think about symptoms and all that, those are some of the things that you have to first think about when you go and talk to people, and when you think about your friends and other loved ones. And so lastly, what I need to tell is that if we are to feel better during these tough times, what exactly can we do? So one of the things that I can tell you is that do not hurry to come up with a specific plan or a solution. You have to always give yourself time, and whenever you come up with a particular solution, weigh the pros and cons, and make sure you lead the particular change that you want to do, and you plan accordingly. Because we need to be accountable for whatever the thing that we do, because if problems do come in our way, we have the ultimate responsibility of addressing them or solving them. So we are not going to get rid of our accountability in those things. But the reason why I'm telling this is because you have to wait for the right opportunity. These days, things are, going in a very different direction. But doesn't mean that we need to completely give up. We have to continue to push ourselves, but just trying for the sake of trying is also not good. We have to evaluate like how good everything is, and we have to wait for the right time. And if you think a particular time is the right time, then you can go ahead and execute your plans, and maybe accept things to go wrong a little bit as well, because that would be the realistic way of picturing ourselves doing something. and it is very important you continue to seek assistance. As I always say, we may drive alone, but the road to success is a shared road. So always make sure you talk to others and you get help as required. And be pragmatic, assess multiple strategies. It could be for your education, it could be for your later career, higher education, and all this. So be very pragmatic and be proactive. Always stay ahead of the curves and always think of the greater good, and acknowledge the difficulty faced by everyone, because this is the difficult time and you have to understand the difficulties would always stay. And none of us expected this back in 2019 beginning, but then it came in 2020. So we have to acknowledge that this is a difficult time for everybody and we have to stay strong. If we are not going to stay strong, we are actually eliminating ourselves from the possibility of even feeling or having chances for us to make ourselves feel better. So never take that possibility out. Always keep that possibility with you, because you are the only one who can change yourself, and you have the key to make yourself a successful person who has better mental health, or better chances of coping up with things. And believe in yourself, learn to tolerate uncertainty, as I always tell. And then you have to kind of figure out ways to deal with excessive worrying. So one of the first things that you could do is stay away from unnecessary news, negative information, and all that. I have met individuals who have said about WhatsApp family groups where they share all this kind of negative information. If that is overwhelming, please leave the particular group. That will definitely help. So there are lots of things like this, but what I want to always tell you is be proactive. Think about the experiences that you have. Try to connect with family members more than that you used to, and think about alternative ways of thinking, because what you experience, what you interpret is the thing that matters end of the day. So thank you very much once again for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you, and I wish you all the best in all your future endeavors. So thank you very much.
Even prior to this pandemic, there were people suffering from mental health issues, but it all went unnoticed until it was too late. Unawareness and ignorance are key factors that could adversely affect a person's life. So, are we aware about our mental health condition, or are we so ignorant that we experience the symptoms but we don't take any actions regarding it? The choice is all yours. Put yourself first and not the opinion of the society. Seek help and don't be afraid to follow what is best for you. Remember, we all are worried about our physical well-being, but mental well-being is equally important. So our request to you is to give priority to your mental health as well, and you will see the difference.